Hey guys, David Robinson here. Welcome to the apartment investing journey. I'm excited about our guest today. I've got a great guy who has some experience in the real estate investing world and property management world. And I'm excited to talk with him about his journey into apartment investing. And without further ado, Fernando, how are you?
Great, Dave. So psyched to be on the show.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time. Just a little bit about Francis. He bought his first income property in 2003 with really no formal training or experience in real estate. By 2006, he started a property management business that grew to operate 500 residential units and represented clients such as Wells Fargo, California National Bank, and U.S. Bank. He's the author of a trademarked book titled Job Plus Real Estate Equals Wealth that serves as a guide to creating cash flow by understanding the nuts and bolts of income property, all while maintaining a full-time career. Today, after selling his property management business, Francis is a sought-after speaker at real estate investing conferences where he spreads his mantra of real estate investing: buy right, manage right, sell right. So Francis, that's just a little bit about you. Obviously, we want to get the whole journey. And so as I do with all my guests, if you don't mind just backing up and telling us about your journey into the real estate investing world.
Sure thing, Dave. Sure thing. So I'm gonna back up right all the way to Dave when the thought as a kid growing up. I grew up in a very corporate environment. My parents were very traditional. Go to school, get a solid education, and make sure you get to work. If work starts at 8 o'clock, you get to work at 7:30. So you're ready to, clock in and put a hard day's worth of work, which is, I think it's a great mantra, and it's what I lived to. Both my brothers ended up becoming very, professionally educated. I myself followed my dad's path, and I got a degree in engineering. And I worked in corporate America for a good 11, 12, oh yeah, just short of 12 years. And the whole time, I mean, I enjoyed my career, definitely had the corporate growth, but there was always this thing in me that was like, the unanswered question of, all right, so is this it? Like, not that I was not satisfied with my job, but is this it? And the control that I felt an employer had over an employee, which is, I attributed it to a faucet. So the employer has his faucet open and you're getting your income and life is good. But what in the event that employer decides to shut that faucet off, right? Then life suddenly becomes, very tough for the employee. And so I wrestled with this, and I always look back and I said, all right, so I've worked for X number of years. What do I have to show for that? So I was big on, from an early age, I was big on creating assets, even though I really never knew anything about assets. Right? I really didn't know the difference between an asset and a liability, to be honest with you. So my big mantra was, hey, I got to start having something that I can show myself that, hey, I've worked for so long, I have an asset, and you know what? Maybe there's some value in that asset. If I were to lose my job, I could sell that off and then I could continue and have lasting power. So that was a big thing I kind of focused on. I read a book, which I know many of you have heard of, and it's been the sort of start of the career path for real estate for many, many folks, which is Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? That kind of gave me an inclination as to, okay, this is how assets work. This is how liabilities work. And that was my first entry into investing in real estate, right? So I had, I started using my corporate money that I was saving up and I started, pumping it into real estate. I built up a pretty sizable portfolio up to about 20 units, I think, at the time. No, actually 15 units at the time. And I was, managing my job, and managing the real estate at the same time. And it was right around this time that I sort of got logistically stuck because I started buying these buildings. My job was really busy. I was flying around. And, I felt like I was like, okay, so something's got to give here because I couldn't manage the assets, the amount of work that was involved in the assets. I had opted to buy multifamily housing. And these were middle of the road, probably class C/D apartments. Most of them needing some sort of, they weren't necessarily distressed, but they needed some sort of value add. So there was some form of instability in the buildings. Either the tenant base was not stable, or the buildings needed some sort of upgrades to bring it up to snuff. So between my job and the apartments, I sort of hit the wall, per se. And that's when I started thinking, all right, I got to figure out how I'm going to, manage these assets. I've got to give, something's got to give. And that was my first business, which I actually don't really talk about. The business was called RentMatch. And it was on the premise of Match.com, which is, hey, you've got a guy who's looking for a lady and a lady who's looking for a guy, and based on certain criteria, they match. Well, I used that same theory back in 2006. I used that same theory for, I have an apartment that is vacant, and here are the specifications of the apartment, and there's a renter. If I can advertise using the power of Craigslist or whatever mechanisms I could at the time, the internet was fairly young, right? How could I match based on certain criteria? And I did that really for my own purposes. So that company, RentMatch, wasn't really available to the public. It was more so to help me sort of pre-screen tenants before I went out to do a showing. So as I was busy at my work, I said, all right, well, if I can pre-screen people and make sure that they're qualified per my criteria, then it makes sense for me to go out and show an apartment because I'm utilizing time. So that was the first sort of step into trying to manage both. And that helped me, I would say, probably 50 to 60% of the logistical issues that I had with managing my apartments. But I still had issues with contractors, meeting contractors on site, making sure that contractors stuck within the scope of what they had promised. In corporate America, if you say something, you typically do it, right? When you're in this world, a contractor says, hey, I'll get the work done and completed by, next Friday. And next Friday I show up on site and the work hasn't even started, right? Meanwhile, I'm bleeding because the apartments are, the lifeblood of an apartment is making sure it's rented.
Can I ask you a question real quick about
Sure.
the rent match concept? So if I understand you correctly, you built up a portfolio of roughly 15 units, and you're working your full-time job, and you're feeling the stress of having to manage all these properties. And so you're trying to streamline this process. And that was that's where RentMatch came from. Can you describe for me what was it? What was the company's purpose, and what did it actually do?
Yeah, so the tagline was, maximizing revenues by minimizing vacancies. So it had one sole purpose. Sole purpose was, I have a vacant apartment. I want to be able to get as maximum exposure and options so that when I advertise or when I want to show that apartment, it's not an inbound call from a tenant saying, hey, I want to see your apartment. Mm-hmm. It was an outbound. It was a very selfish approach for me. It was an outbound call from me saying, I have this vacant apartment and I have about 10 to 15 people that I have on a list as a selection criteria that I can then pre-screen and make an outbound call.
Interesting. Okay.
Right? And so my outbound calls were, hey, I see that you are interested in my apartment and I've pre-screened you and you've qualified. Do you want to meet at the apartment at 1 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon?
Okay. So a very proactive approach. And how were you identifying the potential tenants? Was there some sort of website or technology, or what were you doing to identify the potential candidates?
Yeah, so there was a website, right?
Gotcha.
And again, this was back in 2006. So
right.
as crazy as this sounds, that was sort of high-tech technology.
Sure. Yeah.
But I had made inroads into a lot of the local colleges, the Massachusetts School of Pharmacy, all the local colleges, all the large employers in the regions. I had reached out to them and sent, basically an email campaign saying, hey, if any of your staff or any of your associates are looking for housing, here's a website, and it was a very simple website. It was on the premises of, Google and Craigslist. You go in and it's like, I have an apartment.
Just fill out a basic form with your contact info, and we'll try to find you the appropriate apartment building.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, great. Well, thanks for going into that. I was curious. So pick us up from there. So you started this RentMatch thing really under the premise of I need to, I'm underwater here. I've got a full-time job, 15 apartments I'm trying to manage and get them rented out. I'm dealing with contractors and all that. You're feeling the pain of a full-time W-2 employee job and owning real estate, which so many of our listeners can definitely relate to.
Right. So and then at that point, I started thinking scale, and I had met the right people that were also investors, because I had inserted myself into this world now, this world of real estate investing, multifamily housing, and to me, my interest level just kind of peaked in that, and I think the desire for growth in that area as opposed to growing as an engineer. I always say I think I'm an engineer here up in my mind or up in my brain, but not down in my heart, right? I think I was an entrepreneur by heart, but I just followed the path of what my parents, prescribed was the way to, pursue life. And so it was at that point that I said, all right, I have a decision. I could continue with the RentMatch, which is helping about 50 to 60% of my logistical issues, or I could search out for a property management company to hand my assets over to. And then I can continue to scale up and buy more and then have this, manage the property manager. Or the third option was, well, what if I start my own management company? And that's really the path I ended up, delving down, because I just couldn't find a company that I was satisfied with. And so I actually brought, interestingly, engineering principles. And as crazy as that sounds, engineers tend to be very process-driven people. And for real estate to be, especially multifamily housing, I think one of the key success factors is to be process-driven. Because it's really not a tough business, but it's a business that you need to be super organized. You need to be so systematized, right? So I broke down the business and I said, all right, I'm going to build a property management company. The name of it was Total Solutions Property Management. And the sort of our claim to fame that everything we did, from the time we walked into that office was process driven. So the move-in of a tenant was process-driven. The move-out of a tenant was process-driven. The inspections, the quarterly inspections, the maintenance work was all done on standard time increments. So if we're changing a toilet, it's based on a standard time increment. So everything was systematized. So I think I spent probably close to 6 months just building out those systems before we officially got going as a formal business.
And were you mainly testing this process-driven solution out on your own portfolio then?
Yeah, I did. I had one, my portfolio, which at the time had just grown when I got officially started, had grown to 20 units. And then I did have one other investor who, interestingly, was an engineer, and he was a part owner of the property management company as well. He had a critical mass. He had 100 units. So we started off with a pretty large critical mass of 120 units, where we did test it out. So it was a quote unquote friendly environment for the first 6 months or so.
Great. Okay, so take us from there.
Yeah, so I got going right around 2007, 2008 is, if you recall, is when the foreclosure wave happened. And I had an interesting call from California National Bank, and the call went like this. The call was essentially, hey, Francis, we are foreclosing on a property in Manchester, New Hampshire, which is where my property management business was. We're foreclosing on a property over there, a 20-unit apartment building, and we understand that you are specialized in REO assets, right? Never managed an REO in my life before. And of course, my response was, because I see an opportunity there, I said, his name was Chris, and I said, Chris, absolutely. I said, you know what? One of the things we do is we focus on process. And I talked about being an engineer and how we have a systematized approach. And sort of on the fly, and this is the power of, I think it's thinking on the fly or impromptu thought process and so sort of seizing an opportunity. I thought very quickly about an offering that I knew a bank would be interested in, right? The bank is physically in California. The property is physically in Manchester, New Hampshire. What is the concerns of the bank, right? Number one concern, is this physical asset going to be a liability for me? Number one. Number two, how do I very quickly get this, non-performing asset off my books, right? So as I thought about that, I said, all right, so number one I need to do is I need to take some video footage of this building. I need to inspect the building from a risk analysis standpoint for the bank, provide him with that report, and then give him a 3-month, 6-month operating budget to let him know, hey, this is how much it's going to cost you to hold this asset. And here's a marketing plan to get this thing off the books as quick as possible.
That's great. So did he bite off on that plan?
They did. And, the power of taking care of customers, right? So one bank, spoke to another bank, which spoke to another bank, which spoke to another bank. And before you knew it, that was our biggest growth moment, was that simple phone call that came and an opportunity that I could have very well said, no, you know what, I'm not interested, or it's not really my expertise, or, it's too much of a hassle to manage REO assets, because, banks tend to be really hard to work with at times, especially on the asset management side. But I seized the opportunity. They all spoke to each other. And before you knew it, we went from 150 units or so at the time. We peaked up right around north of it was about 550 units. A good bulk of them were bank REO assets.
And how long of a period was that to go from 150 to 500? I think you said roughly around 2008 is when you picked up your first REO asset.
Yeah. So what
was that time frame?
We went from 2008, I would say, 2010 is 2010, 11, towards the end of 2010 is when we peaked out about north of about 550 units.
Wow. And what was the biggest multifamily asset that you were managing for these banks? Unit-wise, one contiguous building was 30 units, but as far as a portfolio, I had 50 to 75, gotcha, by any given bank. Wow, great.
Spread across smaller units.
And so did you find yourself gravitating towards specializing in REO assets versus just picking up traditional property management or multifamily properties? Did you end up going down that path and was more of your business REO than it was traditional stuff?
At the time, it was more REO, but you know what, Dave, at the time, my focus was take care of the client, right? It's one mission: take care of the client, take care of the asset, right? And really, I didn't really foresee this, but the bank's sort of game plan was not, typically the bank's game plan, like in today's environment, is when they foreclose on a property, they're emptying out the property and they have an asset manager manage an empty building. They had sort of seen the writing on the wall and said, you know what, I think this is going to be a long foreclosure wave. So we're going to actually have these assets as performing assets. Right? It looks more attractive. I mean, a lot of it came from advice from me as well. As I saw some of these assets, I said, listen, this is a 20-unit building. We're much better off, managing this as a performing asset, because then from the eyes of an investor looking to buy this, it looks a lot more attractive as opposed to being a distressed property.
Yeah.
Right. So the banks bought into that. And so I was managing all occupied performing assets. right? So I was providing a P&L at the end of the month. I was actually closing the financials and sending the banks their net proceed check. So I mean, they performed it. They maintained it as an asset. So no, I didn't. I really focused on just taking care of the client, the asset. The beauty with doing that is that as the negotiations occurred with the banks attempting to sell this, they in turn recommended us to the buying party. So they actually packaged and marketed these properties as property management in place.
That's
so
great.
we had longevity. Yeah, we had longevity and continuity in management. When many of the, probably 80% of the properties that sold, we had continuity of management to the new owners.
Oh, that's great. So it's 2011. You're peaking out at about 550 units under management. Where did your business go from there?
Yeah, so we stabilized, like I mentioned, we stabilized around 500. So after the peak of the foreclosures sort of settled down, which was 2011, 2012, we lost a few units to sales that we didn't retain the management. But as I mentioned, we retained about 80% of it. So we were about 500 units that we were managing, and my focus was continue growing the business, right? It was great for me. I had actually picked up a portfolio. So at the time I had 20. Around 2012, I also picked up a few bank assets myself. And I had bought those under distressed circumstances. So those ended up, that smaller portfolio ended up being more profitable for me than my 20 unit because I had bought them the traditional way. So I was investing a little myself, focused on taking care of the clients. And in 2012, I started thinking about, I want to back up for a second. So
yeah, go ahead.
When I was an engineer, right, like one of the things that I packed, when I took that transition from being an engineer into an entrepreneur, I packed my process bag, I packed my systems bag, and I entered the world of entrepreneurship. The one bag that I didn't pack was my marketing bag, right? And engineers, we traditionally don't think like marketers. So I wasn't really a marketer. I was a really like a hardcore engineer that took care of his clients and made sure systems, processes, ethics, we were like on top of our game. Around 2012, I started wearing my marketing hat, and I was intrigued by this funnel concept. Like, how do I cast a wide net so I can help my clients? And the thought that sort of provoked or instigated that, Dave, was, I looked at a lot of my clients, I profiled a lot of my clients. They were all professionals, engineers, lawyers, doctors, tradesmen that were buying, they had full-time careers, right? And they had an intent, sort of like I did, they had an intent of creating wealth through real estate. The sad thing is, many of these people bought these buildings the wrong way, right? They weren't buying them the right way, and they were falling into the trap that I did. They were getting logistically stuck with these buildings, or they were simply buying the wrong buildings, right?
So when you say they were buying them the wrong way, what do you mean by that?
They were buying them based on, and no disrespect to real estate agents out there, but they were buying it with the advice of a real estate agent that's not qualified to sell multifamily housing. Right? They were qualified to maybe sell a single family home or a condo, but they weren't really showcasing the pro forma or the performance analysis of what these buildings are. So a lot of these professionals would look at these buildings and say, oh, okay, this is what the market asking price is. I'm going to make an offer on the building based on the market asking price or the seller's asking price.
More of a comparative market analysis versus working off of an income approach to value the property.
Exactly. And a pro forma to see how much cash flow am I actually going to derive? What's my cash on cash return? What's my cap rate? What's the going cap rate? What are capital projects that have not been, deferred maintenance? What are the capital projects that are upcoming? So these were things that a lot of these folks were buying, these investors were buying these buildings, and then they were coming to the realization that, wow, I think I bought the wrong building. A quick example, this client of mine, had bought a building, brought it over to us to manage. It was a larger, 10-unit building in the city of Manchester. And one critical mistake that the agent did not do for the client was look at the lease expirations of the building. So he bought the building, and within 3 months, the building became 50% vacant. Right, and unanticipated expenses that within a 3-month period he had to go in. To make matters worse, when we went through those units had all the units needed some extensive capital improvements. So not only was there vacancy loss, but there was also the capital expense to get the units up to snuff so that they could be re-rented. Right, leasing fees. I mean, so that was just a quick example of how people were buying the wrong way. They weren't looking at buildings the right way. They weren't doing their pro forma analysis. They were looking at income, expenses, taxes, and insurance. Great. Here's what the market value is, and they were buying them. So I started thinking like a marketer, and I decided to write a book for my clients, specifically for my clients, saying, hey, I need you to help you guys buy buildings the right way. Right. And the name of the book is Job plus Real Estate equals Wealth. The mantra of the book is, how do I keep my full-time job, right? Invest in real estate the right way so that I can create wealth and not lose wealth.
That's great.
Yeah.
And tell us briefly, just a synopsis of what you were teaching these people in the book.
The main thing, the main categories of the book was, hey, first of all, mindset, right? Part one of the book is how do I get the right mindset? And I profiled all my successful clients and what their mindset and mantra was versus my clients who bought buildings the wrong way and exited the market sort of, depressed and scarred, never to come back to real estate. So I did a comparison and I said, listen, this is the mindset of a true real estate investor. That was part one. Part two was real hardcore analysis. It was essentially, the meat of the book is a pro forma. How do you perform a pro forma? And a pro forma also can give you indications of when a building is distressed. How do you then actually identify that and see an opportunity there? Because you might be buying a building with a low cap rate, but there's this value add that you can do. Possibly the rents have been low. Possibly the building has a lot of maintenance issues that just need some capital work to be, to eliminate the maintenance costs.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a really heavy influence on the pro forma. And then the last part of the book was, how do you then manage your success team? Right. So if you're going to work full time, which is what I prescribed, if you're going to work full time, invest in real estate as a part-time venture towards creating wealth, how do you manage your success team? I call the success team as, how do you manage your real estate agent? How do you manage your insurance agent? How do you manage your property manager? How do you manage your banker? And then your contractor, because really these are the folks that are you need to surround yourself with, because if you're going to work full time, you're going to need these people by your side, but you're going to need to learn to manage them so that you can be successful in your endeavor.
Oh, that's great. So that's roughly 2012-ish. You start thinking about it from a marketing perspective, and this concept of a funnel where you can reach the masses and educate the masses and ultimately win business from them. So you use this book, I'm assuming, as the top of the funnel to capture prospective clients. Is that correct?
Exactly. My theory and mantra was, hey, if I can educate someone on how to buy buildings the right way and they end up buying a building, then chances are that they may end up hiring me to manage the asset. And it really did work out.
Great. So take us from there. What happened then after you got done writing the book?
Yeah, from there, it was actually, interestingly, a sort of a turn of events. So I've had a bunch of little turns of events. By sheer writing the book, Dave, the book created credibility for me, and it created a sense of authority. And so I was asked to speak at several industry events regarding real estate, RIA events, Real Estate Investor Association events. And it was at that point that I said, wow, I think I found my passion, right? As much as I like real estate, and I do like real estate, really for me, it's what real estate affords us to do. I call it an accelerator. Real estate for me has accelerated my life. It's given me the opportunity to do things that I normally couldn't have done if I hadn't invested in real estate. But really, from a passion perspective, do I love buildings? Not really. I mean, I love real estate. I don't necessarily love buildings, but I think I found my passion when I was up on stage helping people, and I see those aha moments, and I speak about real estate, and I sort of guide the ship the right way, and I take a person's mindset from point A to point Z, and I say, this is how it works. This is how you invest in buildings the right way. This is how you can lose your shirt or lose money if you buy buildings the wrong way, and do a comparative analysis. So I really found my passion there. And I launched a speaking career in 2014, to be exact.
Great. So what'd you do? What were you doing? I mean, you're launching this speaking career, you've written a book, and you own a property management company that I'm sure you're still heavily involved in at that point in time.
Correct.
How did you deal with all that, and how did it play out?
Well, it was the normal growth pains of any company. As we all know, you hire when you can't afford to hire, right? But you anticipate that, hey, if I hire someone, then I'd be able to deload a lot of the work that I do. So I was big on that. So we did build up a team. We had a team of 15 full-time employees running the property management company. I was still very involved in operations, and I had slowly started, moving away from the day-to-day operations and focusing a little bit more on the coaching, speaking, which was ultimately helping the business as well, because a lot of these folks that I was, coaching and helping, they were coming in, and now we had a lot more satisfied clients, because now they're buying buildings the right way.
Right.
And they buy one building the right way. That building is, ends up making them a profit. And they look at that and say, you know what, like, I think it's time to scale up and start buying more buildings. So it really was a win-win-win, right? Like I created a system where, more people were buying, more people were investing.
That's great.
I was really enjoying the career speaking. I never really at the time I hadn't really, again, because I didn't have my full marketing hat, the speaking, marketing of my speaking career. I hadn't perfected that until, again, I thought about the whole funnel concept, and I started thinking of productizing everything. So my speaking career was more of a hobby from, I would say, 2014 to about 2016 was more of a hobby. If I got asked to speak at a speaking engagement, I got super excited about it. I prepared, and my focus was 100% on the audience. Like, how am I going to move my audience from point A to point Z? So I was very focused on that, but I didn't really think about it from a business perspective and from a scale perspective.
It was something that you really enjoyed. You enjoyed giving back to people, and it benefited your property management business because it created this sense of authority and credibility that you could then funnel these people into your property management business.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the whole time I've still got my apartments. My apartments are cash flowing. I love the fact that I had, I called it the factory, the property management factory. So had I, if I bought unstable properties, which I did, I bought a couple of flips and a couple of properties that were distressed real estate, and then I would, dump it into my quote unquote property management company so that they could stabilize it. So it afforded me the ability to do that just because I had the infrastructure built.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. So then where do we go from there? We're 2016. You have this hobby of teaching, which is really just a marketing strategy to funnel business into your property management business. Where'd things go from there?
So in 2016, I had 2017, I had a monumental speech, and I call it monumental because it was really the turning point of a series of next activities that occurred. I spoke to a large group out of Michigan called Real Estate One. And this was a real estate brokerage, very prevalent in Michigan, Detroit area. And they hired me to speak to all their real estate agents, and we're talking about almost 500 real estate agents, about the value of income real estate, understanding the value and the mechanics of income real estate, which to me was such a passion project for me, because it was a philosophical issue for me that real estate agents that did not understand income real estate were out there selling income real estate to busy professionals that trusted their expertise, bought buildings, bought them the wrong way, and then ended up exiting the market, never to return again. It was a philosophical issue for me. So when I had this opportunity to speak in front of these 500 real estate agents, I prepared for months on end so that I could deliver a powerful message to them. And the powerful message was, do not hurt these clients by misrepresenting them. Teach them the right way, understand the value of a pro forma, understand what you're buying, do your due diligence as far as lease expirations, deferred maintenance, reserve budgets. Make sure that if you're not qualified enough to do that, then do not represent a client on a multifamily purchase. So I spoke at that event in Detroit. That event ended up being super successful. Of course, I got great responses back, not only from the agents, but from the meeting planners, from the brokerage. It was something of value. There was some continued work that I did with them to make sure that these agents, got up to speed and were really comfortable with income real estate. But also, I met a couple of individuals at that event that ultimately facilitated. They weren't the eventual buyers of the property management company, but they ultimately facilitated a series of meetings where they had expressed an interest in buying out our property management company. So at that point for me, Dave, I sat there and I went, wow, didn't even realize this, but over these last, almost 15 years, as tough as it was, and any entrepreneur's journey is tough. I said, as tough as it was, I sat there with a sense of, satisfaction, saying, I've actually created something of value. Right. And I think a lot of times we don't realize that when we're, doing our value adds in real estate, we don't realize the value that we've created, not only from a housing perspective, but also from a wealth perspective. I mean, I sat there and I went, wow, so there is, I've created a management company that has a value. There's a cash flow stream here that has an inherent value. And long story short, I started negotiating with these folks. They were out of Detroit. So they flew me into Detroit a few months later, and they started negotiating with me about the acquisition of the property management company, which was a huge learning curve for me as well, because I'd never sold a business, never valued a business. So I didn't know really, especially when it's a property management company, it's an asset. There's no actual tangible assets. So essentially, they're buying a book of business, right? But I understood the whole theory on how to, or from their perspective, how they valued the business. That deal ended up falling apart, right? Just because the sale never transacted. There was some internal issues with them that, the sale never transacted. But I was equipped with the knowledge on how to value my business. And so 6 months after that, to be exact, 2018, December, we ended up transacting the sale of the property management company.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what do you do? So you sell your property management company. This is something that's been your baby. You've been building this thing for years and years, blood, sweat, and tears, hiring, creating the systems and the processes, working with clients, whether it be banks or individual owners, then moving to educating investors on how to manage their properties better and how to invest in real estate successfully. And now you sell this thing. What the heck do you do at that point?
And to make matters, more interesting, Dave, the company that ended up buying my property management company, again, was December 31st, the last day of the year, December 31st, 2018. 3 months after that, they ended up putting a full price offer into my entire real estate portfolio. my
Your
residential.
personal portfolio.
Yeah, my
Oh, gotcha.
residential real estate portfolio. So they ended up buying my 20 apartments. I had sold off the 6 apartments or the 6 unit portfolio prior to that. So they ended up buying my 20-unit portfolio in March of 2019. So I had transacted everything. I still own a lot of commercial properties and some single family homes. So what did I do? I actually, I hung out for a little bit, and I did a complete self-introspective as to life and, what this all means and where do I go with this and what do I want to do? Um, it's that whole passion, pursuit of passion. Like for me, I think, like I mentioned, I found passion in the speaking industry and the coaching industry, and I knew I had a lot to offer people that were wanting to get into real estate, either new investors that were wanting to get into real estate so that they could create wealth, busy professionals, that were wanting to do that. I knew I had a value add for people that had a sizable portfolio that were looking at creating their own property management company. And I knew I had a value add for real estate agents that did not understand, which again was a big, huge, passion project for me. Real estate agents that did not know how to represent income producing properties for sale. Right. So I embarked on a journey to sort of productize those 3 elements. Right. So again, element number 1, you're a busy professional. You're looking at investing in real estate as a path towards creating wealth. I have I help people with that. You're a seasoned investor and you've got a pretty sizable portfolio and you want to be able to scale up, but you're also looking for some vertical integration and possibly create your own management company so that you can, keep the profits all, centered and within. I've helped several people create their own property management solution, an automated property management solution with all the, touches and feels of an engineer, right? All the processes of an engineer that makes it so much easier to manage as opposed to being a busy business.
Sure.
And then finally, I do travel around the country now helping real estate brokerages with the whole funnel concept, right? And so the funnel concept is this: hey, if you can understand income real estate, right, you're only going to create a very clear niche for your brokerage. You can go out, your agents can go out and now typically represent higher priced properties. It's going to be a win for you because a lot of times they're going to buy those. And if you have a property management solution, they might end up having their properties managed with you. Right. And once you have one transaction like that, if they are buying a single family home for themselves, or there's other transactions that they're doing within their family, they're typically going to work within the same brokerage. So it was a funnel concept that I do offer a lot of the brokerages now.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, what an interesting story. Going from, a full-time W-2 employee as an engineer, understanding and wanting to be involved in real estate and starting that process of actually buying your own income producing properties, and then dealing with the headache, the hassle. I mean, this is such an evolution that so many people go through, right? They start investing in real estate and they realize, oh, I don't just have to buy the real estate. I actually have to manage this asset.
Exactly.
It's not truly passive here. So what do? I either outsource it or I deal with it myself. Many end up, because they don't necessarily buy correctly, have to manage the properties themselves so that they can increase the cash flow and make the properties perform.
Right.
You went through this process and eventually created a solution for yourself that you then started bringing on other clients to help them with their assets, ultimately building up a sizable portfolio of assets under management up to 550, settling in at 500, starting down this entrepreneurial or marketing path of creating content to give yourself more credibility and to educate and provide value to other people. And then ultimately selling the business and your portfolio, and now continuing down a path of educating others in the industry about how to buy and manage property effectively, both as an investor and also as real estate agents representing clients. So, man, what a great journey! And that's an impressive path. I want to start winding down a little bit, and I've got just a few questions that I want to ask you as we do wind down. Are you okay with that?
Sure thing, Dave. Sure thing.
So looking back on your personal journey, what's the biggest mistake you've made in your real estate, and I would say even entrepreneurial journey that you've gone through?
Oh, this one just jumps right out at me, Dave. It's funny. I actually just, I'm a big proponent of education. So I do, I do hire strategists, on occasion when I feel like I've plateaued at what my brain capacity is. I look up and I say, there's got to be people who have gone through this path before, who've created success. And so I am a big proponent of education. So I did very recently hire a strategist. And, we went through, it was a 1 week session. I flew him down from Texas down to Toronto, which is close to where I live now. And we spent a week together. And interestingly, the strategist, after he heard my story about what I've done, he looked at me like dead center and he said, "Francis, you are such a smart guy, but you're the worst marketer I have ever met." And I said, "Oh my God, why would you say that? I just hired you. Why would you say that?" And he said, "Well, a couple of things. Number one, you never really fostered these as much as you took care of your clients. You don't even have a basic CRM, right? So I never really, my focus was taking care of a client. My focus wasn't putting them on a mailing list or a CRM and nurturing those clients. My form of nurturing was taking care of them from a client perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately, my biggest mistake, I would say, is that I did not really create a one housing location for my clients that I could then, because if I look at the evolution, these are the same clients that I could help today in today's world. I could still help these clients, right, with my speaking and my coaching and my and the seminars that I do. But I don't have that one list that's been nurtured right through. And I look at a lot of these successful speakers and those successful coaches, they've got email lists of 100,000+. I am literally starting my, my funnel list and my components, as we speak.
Oh, that's great. That's a great tip and a great realization for other people that are getting into this business, especially if you're someone who has an interest in syndicating real estate. Obviously, there's a ton of power in having a strong investor database that you're communicating with and providing value to on a very regular basis. So what a great realization. Great. What's the biggest win that you've had on your real estate investing journey?
My biggest win, honestly, Dave, is not, I'm not a visionary as much as I've had these little successes, or significant successes. It's been that I am open to whatever comes my way. I am a yogi, right? So I do love my yoga, and I've sort of embodied that whole mantra, which is be open to opportunities, right? So as I look at the opportunities, right from when I was an engineer and I had an opportunity to buy a building, I seized the opportunity, I bought a building. Right? When I had the opportunity to leave my very comfortable job at the time, getting paid fairly well and having a young family at the time, I seized an opportunity to go out and start a business. And when I had that opportunity to manage that, when I got the call from California National Bank, right, saying, "Hey, we've got a foreclosure," I didn't know I didn't have the vision to know where that was going to go, but that ended up being our biggest growth moments. And likewise, when I had the opportunity to speak in Detroit and had someone come up to me and speak to me, I entertained, even though the business was not up for sale, I entertained the discussion of a potential sale because I was so curious and open to any opportunities that come my way. So I think my biggest strength in real estate was really being open to opportunities and really not pursuing the money. It was just pursuing the interest. It was a keen interest of meeting people and knowing what their journey is and knowing what their intention was. And if it made sense, I, took a leap of faith and I prayed to God and I said, "Hey, if this is meant to be, it's meant to be." So I will say my dad gave me advice when I was a kid and he said, never follow the money, follow doing the right thing. And eventually, he said, I guarantee you, and my dad is no longer, but he said, eventually, I guarantee you, if it's meant to be, the money will follow.
Great
And
advice.
so far, it has worked out for me.
Last question for you. What's the best advice you have for someone who's just starting their apartment and real estate investing journey?
I would say I love the word mechanics, right? Again, it must be because I'm an engineer. I love this word mechanics, right? And it's understanding the mechanics of what you want to do, right? I see so many people that, meet them year after year after year, and they're like, hey, Francis, I really want to get into real estate. We should get together and have a coffee, right? I really want to get into it. This is the year I want to do it, right? But when you say, I want to get into real estate, when you say, I want to get into anything, it's such a wide cast net, right? I think it's important for people to understand, sort of niche down and narrow down what within real estate, and then start understanding the mechanics of how you achieve it, right? Because when you cast such a wide net, people, I call it inaction, right? They're stuck in this ever wave of inaction. And for you to go from inaction into action, you've got to understand the mechanics of how it works. So if you're interested in a multifamily building, well, then understand how to analyze it, right? Understand a pro forma, like a basic pro forma, right? Once you understand a pro forma, then you can manage your success team. You can manage the agent and not let the agent manage you, right? You're managing the agent, you're managing the bank. You're then on the driving side of the direction that you want to go in.
Love it.
As opposed to being driven.
Well, Francis, I appreciate you, spending some time with us, sharing your journey, both as an entrepreneur. I think there's a lot of people that can take away from this. Those that are interested in exiting their W-2 job, those that are interested in just investing while they're currently working as an employee, those that are just looking to take the next step in their own investing journey, whether that be buying their first property or outsourcing to management or starting their own management company. I think you have a ton to offer in your journey and your story. So I appreciate you taking the time. How can people get in touch with you to learn more about what you have going on and what you have to offer?
Sure, Dave. I'm an open book. So Francis at francisfernando.com is my email address. My website is francisfernando.com. On Instagram, my handle is how much will I make, right? And it's been my mantra, like if I speak to people and, it's the pro forma, it's the extension of the pro forma. If you're looking at a building, ultimately, how much will that building make, right? If that's what you're driven by, then you got to understand the cash flow benefits of that building. So on Instagram, how much will I make? And I will share my number because I'm open to phone calls too.
Great.
My number is area code 603-860-6240.
Awesome. Well, Francis, thank you so much for taking your time, sharing your story with us and your real estate investing journey and the great success that you've had. And I look forward to connecting with you again soon. I appreciate you coming on.
Dave, it was a pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks so much.